Welcome, Alyce Messer, to the show. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
And if you could, just give me a background on what your position is now and what drove you to become a therapist.
Today, as I'm sitting here, I have a private practice and I work with clients all over the state of Texas. I have an IFS coaching business where I work with a lot of therapists just all over the place, some even in the UK. And then the newest role that I've taken on is really being a therapist educator. So I help a lot of therapists grow their skill set around the modalities that I'm trained in, which is IFS, internal family systems, and EMDR, which is stands for, it's really long, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Okay.
And those are both modalities that can be used to help with trauma, but several other things as well.
Nice. And how did you come to focus on these things?
It really found its way to me. You know, when I became a therapist, I was such a baby therapist. The only thing I really had to from was The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. I don't know if you've ever read that.
Mm.
It's a great foundation. And as I continued to grow, I learned DBT skills, and then the owner of the private practice I worked for at the time was like, "Hey, do you want to go to this? I have a seat at this training." The person backed out. Would you like to go? And that was 8 years ago now, or
Wow.
9 years ago, actually, so I was pregnant with my first daughter. It was EMDR, and then I became EMDR trained several years, and then when I started having kids, I was like, "Oh my gosh," I wanted to feel more skillful when I was parenting my kids, and
Hmm.
every book I was reading said, "If you wanna be a different parent, you have to reparent yourself." And, our parents' credit, like growing up in the 90s, they didn't have Instagram, they didn't have Dr. Becky, and so we have all of these skills at our fingertips, and all of these experts that I was really drawn to suggested reparenting yourself and IFS, which is internal family systems. So it was sort of just one thing after another falling into place for me to learn these modalities,
Hmm.
and then realizing that they integrate so beautifully together. And so I had a great mentor, the owner of the first practice I worked for, Kendall Hart. She's been alongside of me this whole way. I like to call her my fairy godmother. She had similar interests, and so she sort of took me under her wing, and we just continued to grow together. After we both left the practice we were working at, we
Hmm.
started she invited me to help collaborate on her trainings. She was actually the first woman to write a book about integrating the models,
Oh, wow.
and so she would have me assist her, and it just became a lifestyle for me. I always say, especially in regards to IFS, it's not a modality, it's a lifestyle, and it just fits so well with who I was as a person. It was like I this sounds cheesy, but it was kinda like I found my home in therapy because I was like, "Oh my gosh, this just resonates so
Hmm.
much." So that was a long-winded answer.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love it. And since internal family systems, since that seems to be part of the foundational portion of your private practice now, and your training and how you were mentored, what is conceptually, if you could just describe what is internal family systems?
Absolutely. So, I could spend an hour and a half talking about this, but the fastest way to introduce IFS is we all use language like a part of me wants to do this and a part of me wants to do that,
Hmm.
right? Like it's Friday night after a long week, it's your best friend's birthday. A part of me really wants to go celebrate, another part of me just really wants to get comfy on the couch.
Sure.
Right. And so in IFS, we actually get into a relationship with these different parts. We find out why they want to do the things that they do, what they're afraid would happen if they didn't do those things. So it's like we really listen for the strategy. It's like this part wants to get out and socialize. This part wants to lay low, get cozy.
Hmm.
It's like, why? Say more about that. And that's just two like super easy examples. So we could conceptualize any any version of myself as a part of me. Like the part of me when I'm feeling really rested and I have a lot of bandwidth and capacity for my kids versus a part of me that's really stressed out and is like, y'all need to get in bed. I need a break. So it's really differentiating these different aspects of ourselves, finding out where they started, why they do the things that they do. And then in addition to having these different aspects of ourselves, we all have what we call our self energy. And it's called different things in different modalities. IFS isn't the first one to come up with this idea of like this inner wisdom
Hmm.
or like this regulated state of just having flexibility in our nervous system. And the goal is that if from a place of self energy, we can get to know these different aspects of ourself, we can find out like what they would need in order to feel less compelled so they could relax a little bit and we can live a life from a place of more self energy. So more flexibility, more just openness. There are actually 8 C words. The founder of IFS, Richard Schwartz, he loves when things all start with the same letter. So he says that when we're in self energy, we're calm, we're curious, we're compassionate, we're creative, we have clarity. There are a couple of other ones, connected. And so we work to help get to know these parts so they can relax and get into relationship with self energy and heal the wounds that they might protect. So that another, I said it was going to be short, but it was a pretty, I mean, that's decently short explanation of IFS. My other offering is, have you seen the movie Inside Out?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so that would be an example of the different parts of Riley. You know, she had a
Hmm.
part that uses joy as a strategy. She has a part that uses disgust as a strategy, you know, and how all of those parts work together to kind of lead us in our lives and what happens when there's more like inner harmony among our system,
Hmm.
like how we can show up in that way. So, does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fascinating. And
Yeah.
I guess one interesting thing that sticks out to me is the self awareness factor. So it seems like you have to practice this sort of self reflection or self awareness to be able to recognize these parts of yourself.
Mhm.
Uh, how for the layman out there, for the average person out there, how important is it to have self-awareness or time to kind of get into a self-reflective mode so you can identify these things within you?
Yeah, yeah. So when you say self awareness, like what came up for me is what we call an IFS differentiation,
Hmm.
which is having the awareness to differentiate these are different parts of me. This isn't all of me.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I practice becoming aware of my parts and becoming aware of like who's in the driver's seat, that naturally increases that access to my self energy or what you're calling self awareness, that differentiated state.
Hmm.
So it's not like a switch that flips on or off.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like a state that we could access all the time, depending on how much we're willing to get to know the different parts of ourselves.
And then EMDR. So you mentioned EMDR. What exactly is EMDR? If you could
Hmm.
define that sort of conceptually,
Yeah.
and scientifically, like how is it functioning?
So EMDR is an evidence-based modality to treat trauma, single incident trauma. So people who, you know, like veterans or, you know, just things when things that are really horrific have happened. And what they found is that when something traumatic happens, it's stored in our brain without being time stamped in like a fragmented way.
Hmm.
So when we're doing EMDR, you have a relationship with a therapist. Like that's a huge part of any modality is your relationship, the like feeling safe with someone.
Hmm.
Um, but you would ask them to call up that traumatic memory while also taxing their working memory. So like if they bring it out of their long-term memory,
Hmm.
they bring it into their working memory, their short-term memory, and then we add some sort of taxation. A lot of like it was originally eye movement. They would have you follow your fingers with like this, but now they found that any form of taxing the working memory is is helpful and is effective.
Interesting.
And so it's like you're having a mismatch because your body is saying like, wait a second, this was really traumatic, but I'm sitting here with someone safe and I'm also like thinking about I have dual attention, like I'm
Hmm.
thinking of something else in the present moment while I'm also accessing this memory and the memory becomes malleable or like editable. And so it takes the present moment and when the memory gets reconsolidated, like they send it back to long-term memory,
Hmm.
it has this new information in it because our memories are always there it's not like they happen and then they're stored and they can't be changed at all. Like every time we access that memory, it can be stored a little differently. I know that's kind of crazy to think. So EMDR intentionally pulls the memory out of long-term memory, helps it integrate new information, like especially orienting it to time. Like this is over now.
Hmm.
It's not 1995, it's 2026, you know, and that changes the reactivity, like the activation around the memory. And ideally, with the right number of sessions, the right relationship, um, we can get that to where there's zero disturbance. We rate it on a 0 to 10 scale. And it doesn't mean that you forget the memory. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean that um, you're never going to look at it and be like, well, that I don't love that that happened, but it's just not going to pull up like the increased heart rate or like the tension or the need, like feeling like, ooh, like kind of like dissociated when you
Hmm.
think of it.
It makes sense, right? Because the brain is plastic. So that plasticity, it makes sense you could adjust memories, recall things, and
Yeah.
do all that,
Yeah.
refile them. It kind of calls back to Inside Out again. It makes me think of when they're chasing down those bad experiences so they don't, before they get to long-term memory.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. That's exactly right. And, like from a neuroscience perspective, what we're doing is we're creating a prediction error. We could do a whole episode on my obsession with predictive processing framework, but IFS and EMDR both are helping bring these memories, bring these experiences, and offering a mismatch, which is called a prediction error.
Hmm.
And then because of neuroplasticity, when it gets stored, it's updated and has new information. So that's exactly right.
And then you mentioned both of these coming together. So you mentioned
Yes.
that like your mentor, you also do this work where you're integrating these things
Hmm.
into the same maybe process with a person.
Yes. Yes.
Why does integrating these things to use simultaneously seem to be so effective?
Yes, absolutely. So whenever we're looking at, so this is my quick way of explaining this is IFS and EMDR work beautifully together because IFS is the relational component
Mhm.
and then EMDR is the updating component.
Mm.
So if I'm helping a client get to know their parts, get into relationship with their parts, we're able to it's like they're healing on a relational level. We say that people are wounded relationally and they're healed relationally. And that relationship happens between a client and a therapist. And it also happens like between the client's self and their parts.
Hmm.
So it's like we're able to differentiate. We're establishing that self-awareness, and when we find out where did this part learn it's like why it needs to do that job. What rule maintains this job? So, for example, if I have a part that grew up in like a really reactive environment, and so
Mhm.
I'm always scanning. I'm hyper vigilant. I'm always noticing like what's going on, what's going on, and we find out like if my self energy could get into relationship with that part and say, well, what are you afraid would happen if you didn't do that job? And it says, well, I'm afraid I might miss something.
Hmm.
And then as a therapist, I could help facilitate a conversation where we would ask, well, what would be so bad about missing something? And it's like, well, I would lose control or I wouldn't feel safe. And then we could ask, well, has that happened before? And the answer is usually yes.
Sure.
And can we go back to that memory and be with the part of you that was involved in that and use EMDR to desensitize that memory? Would that help you not have to work so hard?
Hmm.
And they're like, maybe the part could say whatever. They could say, well, you could try. I don't know if that's possible, but it does. It does work. So being able to get into relationship with a part, find out what they're afraid would happen if they didn't do their job, and then offer EMDR to that experience
Hmm.
where it's no longer reactive. It's just like this beautiful dance that you're able to do. And it could take anywhere from, can this all happen in one session? Yes. It could also take, 7 months or 5 years. It just depends
Sure.
on, the person's system. We're always going to follow the system. The other thing about IFS is it's very permission based. We're not forcing anything.
Hmm.
We're just meeting people where they are and like helping them feel safe enough in the therapeutic relationship to be able to go those layers deeper and get to know those parts. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. And what kind of impact have you seen it have, I guess? Because when I think about people going through this process, however long that process takes, the kind of shift and potential that they might realize within themselves or start to be able to express, or how
Mhm.
their relationships just out in the world, with their
Mhm.
spouses, with their friends, with their family in
Mhm.
general, with themselves, obviously, could change. So, what kind of impact have you seen it have on clients?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, I could be a little dramatic here. It's totally transformational. It's been totally transformational for me, and how I show up in my relationships with anyone, my kids, my husband, my friends, but and then someone who has had just a horrific childhood, who's constantly lived in this state of just hypervigilance, just almost being paralyzed with fear or just so anxious because they're just, their system hasn't updated or oriented to time. Parts of
Hmm.
them haven't. It can completely transform. Operating completely from a part to being able to differentiate and increase that access to self energy, that access to that, all those 8 C's of just being able to see things from a different perspective. It can it just can completely transform how you interact in the world. And not to say that healing is linear. Like, I would never say that it's like a one and done. It's an ongoing process. But when you establish that self awareness, it's like you get to activate different levels of healing. It's almost like a video game. It's like you get to level up. So it's like I have learned different lessons based on the same life experiences time and time again, but it's like I'm always leveling up, or it's like going a little bit deeper, or I have more clarity. That's one of the 8 C's of self energy that I love, the clarity. It helps me live my life from a place of hope, like being in a state of clarity. It's like no matter what's happening in my life, if I can unblend from a part that's a little bit anxious about uncertainty,
Hmm.
I can say, my clarity, my self led clarity tells me that in any situation, more will be revealed and there's a lesson to be learned. So it has just completely changed the way I show up in my life. And it can offer that, and that's me personally, and that's what it can do for others as well.
The concepts that you're describing, they sound, I mean, obviously they have fundamentals to them, but they sound abstract in a way,
Mhm.
which in my mind leaves room in the process for creative thinking and creative
Yeah.
approaches to take place.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, in therapy in general, what is the role of creativity, and
Yeah.
how does it play into a therapeutic process?
Yes. Yes. So whenever we're healing relationally,
Mm.
we there has to be safety, and we have to consider someone's window of tolerance. And the window of tolerance is the level that neuroplasticity can take place,
Mm.
where someone feels safe enough to not have their amygdala isn't hijacked. They're not like looking for danger,
Mhm.
and they're not like totally shut down. So I like to say that good therapy happens in this sweet spot where there's not too much activation, but they're not like completely flat either. And so when we're assessing someone's window of tolerance, like this, the place where good therapy can happen,
Mhm.
we sometimes we have to be like creative and think outside the box of like, what is it that I can bring to our relationship that helps you feel safe enough to be open to change? Part of bringing creativity into that space is really meeting your client where they are and helping them access that safety and stay in their window of tolerance in a way that works for them.
If you zoom out and you look at, let's say, society as a whole,
Mhm.
it's filled with individuals. All these individuals have these parts within them. If you look at the way we function in society and just in our relationships in general, what is the role or what is the importance of therapy in a general sense?
The ultimate goal and this is I'm like I said, IFS is like the way my brain works now.
Sure.
And when we can help, first off, differentiate, if I can differentiate within myself and I can say, when I got really mad at my partner, there was a part of me that felt really offended and wanted to lash out, raise my voice. And I can come back and I can talk to him and I can say, hey, yelling at you wasn't effective. A part of me got really angry and I lashed out and I want to work on getting to know that part and responding in a different way. So I, as like, essentially, in order to improve my relationship with my partner, I want to speak on behalf of my parts instead of from my parts. And so I can
Mm.
show up. We call it unblended in IFS, but it's really like undifferent, like being differentiated. So I can say, hey, this is what was going on. This was a part of me. That doesn't mean it was okay, but I just want to let you know that, when I called you that name, it wasn't all of me that thought that. And it was a part of me. And I'm going to get into relationship with that part so I can show up differently. So, starting out, I do that within myself. When I am bought in to that's how I operate,
Mhm.
then I can look at my husband, and when he lashes out, I can say, "Hey, I know that's a part of him. That's not all of him."
Mm.
And so I have more compassion when I look at him and when I see that he's blended with a part. And so it's helping me not take things personally, because which goes back to the 4 agreements, by the way. But it's helping me not take things so personally and looking at my partner through a more compassionate lens. Okay, and then let's take that a step further, because now I see someone at the grocery store being super rude
Mhm.
to the cashier. And I'm thinking, wow, there is a part of them there that is really not having a great day. And instead
Right.
of being like, what a jerk, I'm like, man, I hope that part figures out what it needs in order to not have to operate like that in the world. So, Richard Schwartz, the guy that brought IFS to the people, if you will, he says that IFS can save the world. And I know, again, like I know that sounds a little dramatic, but when I can look at everyone through this lens of that person is that way for a reason, that part is that way for a reason, I can be curious about it, I can be compassionate. I don't have to like it,
Mhm.
but I see the full scope of their humanity instead of looking at that part as their whole person.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
that makes sense.
So if we're thinking of therapy in general, any modality that's helping us get more curious about our internal experience,
Mhm.
it's almost like that becomes contagious. In IFS, we say self begets self. So if I'm in self energy, maybe that calls out your self energy. And now you're more curious. And maybe you're looking at people through this lens of, I wonder what part of them that is, and they're that way for a reason. And that
Mhm.
makes sense in the context of their life.
Speaking to each other about it too, like, when we are differentiated, it sounds like, and you're able to communicate with someone about it, how that might influence their own perspective, and then you get into this exchange,
Yeah.
whether it's with your partner or a friend or,
Yeah.
anyone right out there.
Yeah.
Um, that's so interesting. And when you're talking about this, it's kind of interesting. I come more from the philosophy side just because that was, like, something that I studied since being a teenager all the way through college and even after. So much of what you're saying, I feel like is the actual scientific, good, effective, applicable sort of methods for things that are a little more abstract in the philosophy world, things like stoicism or taking the objective point of view, being able to step outside of yourself in a moment and understand like what your feelings are and understand like what the anger might be that's arising within yourself and recognizing it and sort of letting it dissipate.
Yeah.
Um, so things like that, I think it's so interesting how a lot of these modalities or practices or just historical accounts of reflection, it feels like everyone's always aiming at the same thing, and it's just how to live a better, more functional life.
That's exactly right. You're exactly right. I have that exact same thought. And I like to think of it as we're all, because we all have, the same brain,
Mhm.
right? Well, not, you know what I mean, though.
Yeah.
It's like the same structures of our brain. And healing is always operating on these, like having some space, getting some distance, not having an agenda, like being more curious, being more objective.
Mhm.
And I think it's all around like mindfulness, intentionally paying attention, like just being able to be with instead of always operating on, just get, but totally right.
Mhm.
And what I like to say is all of these modalities or all of these philosophies, they're really suggesting the exact same thing. It's just different entry points.
Right.
And it's just finding the entry point that resonates with you.
And there's a I his name is McKinnon. He was I think a psychologist maybe in like the 50s, maybe 40s, 50s is when he kind of breaks out. And his whole focus was creativity.
Mhm.
And what is different about, I mean, back then they were differentiating between like there are creative people and there are non-creative people. Of course, we now know that's not true. Everyone is creative in their own right and everyone has the ability to practice those muscles. But he kind of like distilled these characteristics of a creative person or creative thinking. And one thing that you keep mentioning that I love is curiosity.
Mhm.
And if you can basically foster that curiosity within yourself, it's almost like this door or window to remain open to new experiences or
Mhm.
other lifestyles or information that maybe you would normally be closed off to. Just because that curiosity is like, I want to go deeper. I want to understand more,
Yeah.
which I think is so interesting. So it seems like there's this creative thinking that winds itself through therapeutic practices because it's so much of it is around curiosity, stepping back, looking within,
Mhm.
and then applying those things out in the world. So that's just fascinating to me.
Yes, yes. And what I want to offer is, when we're talking about this state, because we have, and when we're talking about IFS, we have our parts, and our parts are like the doers. It's like the parts of us that want to do something.
Hmm.
And then self energy, the part of us that's not a part, if that makes sense,
Mhm.
is a state. And creativity is one of those 8 C's: creativity, calm, connected, clarity, all of compassionate, curiosity, all of these words. I truly believe they're all synonymous.
Hmm.
And it's they're all part of this state. And then he also, these other words that he has to describe an IFS therapist, they all start with a P: playfulness, presence, perspective, patience. All of those things to me describe this same state. And it's like when we have access to this state, we do have access to that creativity.
Hmm.
Like, does that make sense?
Yes, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. So, like, no attachment to an outcome.
Well, it's fascinating to learn about this. And earlier you said there's one thing I was going to have you dive deeper on. You were kind of talking about your relationships when you're young. Maybe, I don't know if this specifically like when you're a child, your
Mm,
relationships with your parents and your family, and how those relationships when you're young really define long term how your relationships go.
mm.
If you could just give me a description of kind of like what you mean when you kind of talk about those things and why in therapy are we often looking far backwards?
Yes. This is my passion project, Roger.
Good.
I'm
Good.
so excited you asked about this. So, I am so passionate about attachment. And attachment is a universal thing that happens in all of us, even if our experience, with attachment is not feeling attached to anything as a child, if we have some terrible circumstance. But every single one of us comes into this world looking to attach with a primary caregiver, whether it's our parents, whoever. But this is happening throughout our childhood. Our brains are prediction machines, and we are immediately learning predictions for what keeps us alive. And so, when as a baby I cry, my parents come or my caregiver comes. I'm learning this prediction: when I cry, and when I cry like this, someone comes to me. When I laugh, I see delight in my parents' faces, and so it's everything is we're creating these predictions, and it's what we're looking for. The things that we're going to turn up
Mhm.
are things that improve proximity, bring my attachment, my caregiver close to me, or and what brings them delight. And it doesn't have to be that, but a lot of it is around proximity and delight. So I'm turning up the behaviors that bring my caregiver closer to me, and I'm probably going to turn down the behaviors that promotes distance. And these adaptations for attachment are what turn into our internalized predictive models
Hmm.
where they're like, okay, this is the response I get when I act like this. And those are what we also call our parts. So my whole thing is our parts, a lot of our parts are adaptations for attachment. They're formed from adaptations from attachment. This attachment is so crucial because if, as a 0 to 7-year-old, 0 to 10-year-old, if I don't have a relationship with my parents, I don't stay alive. So the stakes are pretty high. It's about survival,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And once I have this model in place of this is how I stay alive, our brains don't care about personal growth and our brains don't care about happiness. They care about keeping us alive.
Hmm.
So if something has worked to keep us alive, we're going to continue doing that. So then flash forward and our brains, again, they're prediction machines. They love efficiency. You're seeking out familiarity. And that's why you always hear, like, oh, I married my mom or I married my dad. I had never in a million years thought I was going to marry my dad. But into my relationship, I'm like, oh my gosh, I married my dad, you know? And it's because that feels like home to us.
Mm.
Our brains are like, ooh, we know how to work with this. This is familiar. Home doesn't necessarily mean like healthy or it just means familiar to
Mm.
our brains.
Right.
So these attachment styles that we internalize from being a child or these adaptations for attachment, we carry with us throughout our entire lives.
Hmm.
And it's through therapy and that differentiation and that awareness that we're able to see, oh, this is why I do what I do. I think capacity, not it's a great synonym for self-energy, right?
Hmm.
And creativity and calm and clarity and curiosity and spaciousness and no attachment to an outcome. So essentially
Interesting.
now we're all tying this back to what did my parents have the capacity for? How much self-energy did they have on board? How much access did they have to that potential flow state, to that the ability to be creative without an attachment to an outcome? It's like if we think about our parents it's like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. And I guess there's one thing that I think about, especially for our generation, maybe for you and me in particular. And of course, one thing the viewers don't know is we grew up down the street from each other. We were childhood friends. There was a whole group of us. We had a great street, which is another thing. Like because our parents weren't around, we were always just loitering around in the street, going from house to house. Biking around the neighborhood. Um, but I think part of that maybe there's like an economic factor, right? Like both of our parents, in both cases, needed to work
Mhm.
to support the family. So
Mhm.
and those work hours a lot of times, and people weren't working from home back in that time.
Yeah.
So those work hours where you're in the office, you're there all day until
Mhm.
a certain time, and you're committed. And of course, both of us are from families that sort of love their labor, like
Yeah.
are passionate about what they do. So
Yeah.
there's even more commitment to those
Yeah.
things.
Such a good point. Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that yeah, how the different things will factor into your capacity and your ability to access that self energy, even if it's not internal, even if it's like externality, right, that comes in and
Yeah.
puts a force on the situation that isn't always controllable, or
Yeah.
at least to some perspective not controllable, but how you react to it.
Yes. And if you think about like, the economic class you grew up in, that's also impacting your relationship. It's like, am I allowed to want?
Hmm.
Like, am I allowed to want
Yeah.
like different things for myself? And that absolutely can directly tie to, do I even have capacity to be creative? Am I even allowed to want that?
Right.
Does that feel extravagant to want? It's like I need to be working, I need to be providing. Like I have these parts that say, if you don't make money, you don't survive. If you're not successful, you don't survive. It's like, who am I to think I could take time to relax and allow myself to open up to whatever creativity feels like for me. So I mean, I think all of this goes back to, I know it's a very big statement and it sounds really cliche, but it's like I really do think it all comes back to our childhoods and
Hmm.
our like the adaptations which turn into our parts, like how we survived, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and there's a whole evolutionary aspect to that, which is interesting because you're like you said, your brain is this predictive model, and your brain is really, really good at one thing, which is maximize every trait in the environment that helps me survive.
mhm.
So it's interesting how we can easily get caught up in that hypervigilance when you're just constantly looking for your next piece of how do I survive and how do I get further.
Yeah.
in life, and then you end up defining all these attachments. That is fascinating.
Yeah. Our brains being prediction machines, it's like, okay, I'm sitting here with Roger Peters. What model do I have when I am in the presence of Roger? Like, what am I calling? Like, what is familiar to me? And at this point in our lives, it's like a really like warm, familiar, like, what's the word? Nostalgic feeling
Hmm.
where it's like my brain like relaxes. It's like almost like a dopamine hit, like to
Hmm.
be in the presence of someone that you genuinely like have like regard and have love for.
Hmm.
So I love you, Roger. You know,
I love you too.
yes, yes. So I think that there's also this component of like chemically, like we have these like chemical
Mm.
reactions in our brain and having, this kind of like longevity in our relationship.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is cool.
Is there a visualizing component to differentiation? So, do you visualize it in any way in your mind when you say, like, there's that part of myself,
Mm-hmm.
I need to not access that part of myself, and I need to step back and maybe access this other part? Or do you see them in your mind in any kind of
Mm-hmm.
visual sense?
Mhm. Some people do. I have a harder time with visualization, so for me, like, as I'm sure you've noticed, I talk with my hands a lot.
Mhm.
For me, it's very much of, like, I'm like, "Okay, I need some space." Like, I just push something away from me. So there's still this, like, somatic experience with
Uh-huh.
it, but it's not necessarily a visualization. But when I'm working with my clients, we'll say something like, "I hear that part of you. Like, is that part open to giving a little bit of space?" And sometimes that lands with people, sometimes it doesn't. So I may say, would that part be open to sitting in that chair over there and observe while we're doing this work? Because we're trying to get space from the parts to get to know parts as well.
Right.
I could take you through a little IFS exercise at some point if you wanted, but yeah, there is definitely for some people it is very visual.
I love how transformative the work that you do can be for
Hmm.
people. And it's cool. It must be interesting for you to be able to apply that personally, but then, you get to see that transformation in yourself,
Hmm.
whether large or small, but then you get to see it also in your clients.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine how good that feels when you can actually make an impact and when you can actually see someone transform. And so I'll kind of pose it maybe as that question. What is that feeling you get when a client comes back to you and they say that, like, hey, this is really like transformed how I show up in the world
Yeah.
and my behavioral patterns, my habits, like this, I feel like a new person.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man, it is so many things come up. Like, number 1, it's such an honor. It's such an honor to be able to accompany someone on that journey. I'm always thinking of, like, the perfect word, like, what am I doing as an IFS therapist? It's like, I'm not healing them, or IFS and EMDR. It's like, I'm not healing them, I'm not guiding, well, maybe guiding is kinda close, but it's like, I'm not fixing them. It's like, what is the verb that I'm doing? And what really has landed for me is I get to accompany them.
Hmm.
It's like I get to accompany them on this journey. And there's a IFS therapist, his name's Mike Elkin, and he says, "You need someone to tell you if you have spinach in your teeth." So sometimes we need someone to be able to tell us what we might not see. And sometimes, like, part of the beauty is being able to point out those updates to them. It's like hearing them say something where, like if like when you started therapy 6 months ago, you were terrified to ask for your needs to be met, and then all of a sudden you're setting boundaries and I'm able to say, "Hold on a second. Can we just slow things down? Did you just tell me that you set some boundaries? Look at that. Like,
Yeah.
look at and it's just like, "Oh." And I was telling you earlier, I have this, like, freakishly good memory. And so there are some people I've worked with for, like, 7 years, and 7 to, gosh, even, like, 9 years at this point. And I can look back and say, "Hold on. Did you just hear what you s" It's like I get to be a cheerleader for them. And so maybe they don't always see because they're living their lives, but it's like when I can point out to them, "Gosh, can you believe you just said that? Like,
Hmm.
can you believe you did that?" And it is number 1, it's incredibly rewarding. There's a part of me that feels like a proud mom, like, because not that I have any responsibility, but I have accompanied them, and this relationship did facilitate
Yeah.
the ability for those changes to take place. So it is just, I feel like I have the best job in the world, and I feel that every single thing that's happened to me in my life has set me up, like, for better or for worse, everything that's happened in my life has set me up to be who I am today. And I feel so excited about who I am today, and I feel so excited that I get to accompany people and that I have capacity. Like, I always tell whoever I'm working with, you don't have to worry about my capacity. You don't have to worry about me.
Hmm.
I'm here with you. This isn't a reciprocal relationship, like a relationship in your outside life. Like, you are not here to take care of me. I am here to be with you. And there's nothing you can tell me that would change my mind. I know you make sense. I know inherently you're a good person. There's no question about it. I know you have self-energy, you know?
Hmm.
Like, and so I'm already setting this stage where I want them to know that I have capacity so I can help them find their capacity. And then I also, I was telling you earlier, like, I get to help other therapists get to this place where they feel that way as
Right.
well, And so it's like the ripple effect, the ripple effect of, like, how the work I do on myself translates to the work I do with clients,
Hmm.
translates to the work other therapists do with their clients. And it's like this huge effect. It's so cool. Like, I'm so lucky, right?
Yeah. Love that.
Uh,
And thanks for coming on the show.
You are so welcome. We covered so many things. It's like my whole philosophy in this however long it's been. So
Yeah. Yeah.
very cool.
Appreciate it.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Roger.
Our executive producers are myself and Jessica Kramer. Our producer is Giselle Saucedo. Our editor is Max Smith. Music by Creators. I'm your host, Roger Peters. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in.